Welcome to Standard Deviation.
Hey there, Ciara.
Hey, Kevin. How's it going?
Oh, it's going. This is our first time starting this recording because the first time that is now, we didn't forget the SD card. So
Yeah.
I always feel like a phony starting over, so I'm just going to talk about something else.
We're only like 10 seconds in.
Yeah, that's true. I recently listened to Stuff You Should Know. It's one of my favorite podcasts, and they covered morphic resonance recently.
What's that?
It's this theory developed by Rupert Sheldrake, formerly a biochemist, who, while he was doing his PhD research at Cambridge, and he also did a postdoc at the Royal Society of London, and he did something at Harvard as well. But throughout his research, he was struggling to accept the common notion that DNA is what is passing information to generations of organisms. And that has become somewhat questioned, at least to the extent that now we have epigenetics and other ideas. So, Darwinism and the whole theory of DNA is a lot less strong than it was at the time, which so maybe he was cueing into something. But anyway, he developed an idea that behaviors and other things are in fact influenced and passed on by morphic fields. Morph, it refers to shape or form, and a field is a field. So what he's talking about is that things that share a similar shape or form in the world are able to learn from each other either non-physically or at least non-locally. So, for example, there was a rat study in the early 20th century at Harvard that was trying to disprove Darwinian evolution in favor of Lamarckian evolution, which would suggest, I think, that a lot of behaviors are... I can't remember. I'm not going to try. But what the study was testing was whether or not rats who were able to pass through a maze quicker than others, if they were bred with other such rats, whether that would accelerate their ability for the future generations to pass through the maze. And what it found, interestingly, was, yes, that was true. That was controversial at the time. The whole idea of passing behaviors through genes was pretty controversial.
Wait, were these rats that just were really good at mazes already, or
No.
they learned the maze?
Yeah, so it was a maze that had a negative stimulus. So, like, if you went out the wrong way, I think you got electrocuted or something. So initially, the rats were just random rats, or not random, but they weren't. They had no experience with mazes.
Okay.
And so he would train them through electric shock.
Gotcha.
And then he would breed the ones he called dull with the ones he called bright. I think that was the experiment that used those labels.
The ones who learned the maze quicker.
Yeah. And at the time, this was really controversial. Everybody thought behavior and learning came from the environment, not from the parents and their genes. So other people tried to reproduce this, and one, Agar and Crew are the two I can think of, and their results, they found a couple interesting things. One that actually seems to discredit the study found that the rats in the control group who weren't trained also learned the maze through future generations, despite not being conditioned, which is interesting. But then...
Wait, so the control group was rats that didn't go through the maze at all?
Yes.
And they bred them, and they made rats that were better at going through mazes?
Yeah.
Okay.
And at the time... nobody could explain it. Neither Agar nor McDougall, who did the original study, could figure out why. McDougall went back and confirmed that he found a similar effect in the control group rats that he studied over a period of 5 or 10 years or something. He found that there was actually also what he called a disturbing observation, that they were learning how to get through the maze better as well. He offered...
Why is that disturbing?
It's disturbing because there's no explanation for it.
Well, that makes it interesting, right?
Yeah, he's a scientist, whatever. He's dramatic, some drama queen. But he suggested that maybe just the fact that the rats were in his laboratory, like, somehow made them smarter. But he was like, seriously, that's pretty weak, and I have no idea, essentially. And when Agar did this study, or Crew, I can't remember which one, same thing. He's like, this is weird. I don't get it. It's the same in both cases. Doesn't make any sense. So essentially what's happening is that rats that have never met and are not related in different parts of the world, these studies were in Harvard, in Boston, Massachusetts, in Melbourne, Australia, and Edinburgh, Scotland. They all had the same effect. And not only that, but when the future studies started to try to replicate the original Harvard studies, the rats from all groups started approximately at the same skill level as the original rats finished at, which, again, does not make any sense according to current scientific paradigms. The suggestion is morphic fields allowed the information about the maze to propagate non-locally to all rats of that species or whatever.
What does non-locally mean?
Non-locally means across space, but without traveling.
Okay.
So, like, in quantum mechanics, non-locality is this idea that information can propagate from one spot to another without seeming to actually traverse the space. It's just in two places at once.
Okay.
So, yeah, and so what's interesting about this and some of the other psychic or paranormal, which none of these words work for me. Like, psychic technically works, but it's got too much baggage. Paranormal is not accurate because I don't think this is not normal. I think it's just unorthodox and kind of strange. Anyway, one of the interesting things I'm noticing about a lot of this stuff is that these studies that are being cited by Rupert Sheldrake and others, it sounds like the kind of things that would get more attention, right? Like, why don't I know about this? Why isn't this already a thing? And what I keep noticing is that in each of these cases, the results just keep getting set aside. The scientist is like, well, it's weird. I didn't anticipate this. I have no explanation. Moving on. And that kind of fits with the idea of scientists have very specific goals, and when they get anomalous results, they don't always pursue them. Usually, they just throw them out or whatever. And I think what's happening is that in these cases, they throw them out when they don't conform to an existing scientific paradigm. So,
but that's all the more reason they should be exploring it.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, so like this study was done at Harvard, this first one. And like this guy, like this was his job, was studying genetics and arguing a controversial case for Lamarckian evolution against Darwinian evolution.
What are those?
Lamarck had
Darwinian.
I think Lamarck was before Darwin. I'm not sure, but it was something different about evolution. I really don't know.
Okay.
I forget. I used to know that, but I forgot. But anyway, it's highly technical, highly specialized. He's being funded by Harvard. They have a specific reason to fund him. He has a department to consider. He's writing articles to keep his job. So, like, just not a lot of time to look into it, I guess. And to be fair, maybe in his off time, his nights and weekends, he sat and pondered it every day. I don't know. But, yeah, so there's that. There's some other studies. There were studies with chicks, little birds, that found that, God, I already forgot some of the details. It found that if you had two stimuli that you gave a bird to peck at when it was newborn, and then after one of them, if you injected it with something to make it sick, generally speaking, those birds will learn not to peck at that one thing. But this study that was done found that future generations were less likely to peck at, or not future generations, future chicks that were not related were found to be more hesitant to peck at the noxious stimuli before they had any reason to think it was noxious. So again, it's not clear where they're getting this information. It's not genetics. So it raises questions.
Yeah.
And I don't know if morphic resonance is the best explanation. I don't know enough about it. Seems to fit fairly well. I'll also say, though, that when I look at the individual studies to see if what's being claimed is true in the data, not the conclusion about morphic studies, but just the results themselves, or morphic fields, rather, that's all being confirmed. And any attempts I've seen to discredit that or debunk it have been pitiful. So, at the very least, the data's there. It's anomalous.
What kind of sample size are they working with these chicks and rats?
Let's see. The rats, I'm not sure. The chicks, I believe... Oh, I don't know that either. Yeah, I'm not sure. If anyone wants to check these out, just Google Rupert Sheldrake and chicks or rats or something. He references these a lot. Some of these studies he actually did with other people who were skeptical of his claims. They were trying to debunk him and failed. And generally, they don't handle that well. They try to lie, essentially, or just back out. But yeah, so now I have to start doing psychic research.
So how are you gonna do that?
I don't know. I started Googling psychic research to see, like, what are some experiments people do? Sheldrake has some experiments, but I'll probably participate in those as well, but they require like buddying up with people through the site. Like you can get your friends together and do psychic research through his website, which is good because that means it's kind of governed. But I want to do more regular studies than that. So I tried Googling it, and surprisingly, I didn't see a lot of obvious examples of like at-home psychic studies, but I'll just make some up. Because some of them are really simple stuff. Like one of the ones on his website is you and your friend get together at different places. You're each shown 2 pictures. One of you is told which one to stare at. One of you is supposed to guess which one you're staring at. Mm-hmm. And you do this much time, switch. And that's the experiment, just to see if you have a greater than random chance, or if your results beat chance, basically. Mm-hmm. So, like, if it's that simple to do a psychic test, then I'll start doing something like that, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if anything like this was ever brought up to the $1 Million Challenge. Good
question. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, for people that don't know, James Randi, thank you, is a famous former magician, skeptic. And he now is pretty popular within the skeptic community, which Kevin has a lot of criticisms over. But he had this really cool game show for a while, and I think he still has this challenge that's just kind of up for grabs, which is if someone can prove, anyone who claims they have some kind of special supernatural abilities can go through James Randi's scientific protocols to prove that they actually have it, and if they pass the test, then they get $1 million. And so far, like, no one's claimed. Many people have tried, and that's what the game show was like people who claim they could see auras or psychic or something like that. And James Randi's whole thing is like he used to go after this guy named Uri Geller, who claimed he could bend spoons with his mind and like do all this other supernatural stuff. And James Randi, being a magician, was like, that's a trick. I know exactly what you're doing, and you are lying to people. And he doesn't like people who trick people and lie to people. And so, he would demonstrate and show, like, look, I can do it too, and I'm telling you this is a trick, To
be clear, he only did that in some cases. There's some things Uri Geller did that are still not explained, such as at the Stanford laboratory.
What did he do? He
was able to correctly tell... This part's on YouTube, so if I get this wrong, just check it out. But they had an experiment where there was a person in one room with a sealed envelope with a photograph or a picture of something in it. He was in another room, and he would try to draw what was in the envelope, I think before they opened it and after they opened it. And the results seemed to confirm that he was accurate more often than he should be.
And when did he... Wait, who conducted this experiment?
I believe it was the University of Stanford, or Stanford University.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, James Randi has this $1 Million Challenge that no one's claimed. So I wonder if...
I wonder about that too. And I'm going to speculate, but I am just speculating. I don't know anything about James Randi's ethics or scientific ability. But I will say that if he's associated with some of the other professional skeptics, in scare quotes, I would be hesitant to believe it at face value without looking at the details, because some of those people are just so full of shit. Like one of these studies that I was looking at with the dog, one particular dog named JT, who apparently is able to tell when its owner is coming home. One of the professional skeptics got involved with this, Robert Wiseman, who is another former magician turned skeptic. I don't know what the trend is there. But
I think it's just people that they get they're magicians, and their whole thing is like, hey, I'm doing a trick. This is an illusion. And then they see people doing the same thing, using that to con people. And so they have a personal problem with that.
That makes sense. Yeah. And anyway, so Wiseman, I only know of two things he's done as a skeptic. One, and he was with SciCop, the Center for Scientific Investigation of Claims of Paranormal, which is now just CSI, Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, I think. Mm-hmm. So there's 2 cases I know that he was involved in. The first one I saw years ago was a documentary called The Girl with X-Ray Eyes, and it was about a girl named Natasha Demkina in Russia, who claimed that she could look at people and see inside their body, sort of, to tell what kind of illness or injury they had. And so this was a study done to debunk her, really. And there's a documentary about it. I recommend people check it out. And there's a lot of problems I have with the way it went down and the kind of antics Wiseman pulled, but I'll just cut to the chase. He established a criteria of, what was it? I think he said that if she got 5 out of 7 correct of these diagnoses. So
they had like 7 patients.
Yeah, they had 7 patients, and they gave her 7 envelopes with 7 cards with diseases written on them. She had to match them together. And one of them was a control. It was no disease or no injury or whatever, which already has problems because nobody doesn't have any medical ailments. It's just that some are subclinical, so they may not know they have them. But anyway, So yeah, they did that. They at the last minute pulled. They wouldn't let her mom in the room, which didn't seem like a big deal to me. But apparently, her mom is like always by her side, and so she was kind of disturbed by that. They wouldn't let her look directly at the patients. They had them turn around and stand in a row blindfolded. Normally she interacts with them, looks at them, that kind of thing. And despite all this...
Well, that seems like... that's... What problem do you have with that?
I guess my problem with that is that she has no idea how she's doing what she's doing. Mm-hmm. But if she normally does it under certain circumstances, they could start by testing those circumstances. Mm-hmm. If that's confirmed, then slowly add barriers to find out in a scientific manner what's actually happening. Mm-hmm. But instead they started with, we're just going to make this as hard as possible. Let's say I'm doing this and like you have like a broken arm that's healed, you broke your arm 10 years ago or something, and that's what I'm supposed to figure out. It's possible by interacting with you, I could pick up subconscious cues, like maybe you hold your arm different, maybe you touch it sometimes, something like that. But even if that's what's happening, that's worth inquiry.
Yeah,
if somebody can figure something like that out. To be fair, maybe they only had a budget for one experiment and, they're skeptics, so they're going to just try to swing it out of the park. And anyway, so... those are the conditions, unusual conditions, lots of surprises, criteria changed at the last minute, and even under those conditions, she got 4 out of 7 correct, which meant she was debunked, according to Robert Wiseman. The statistics would suggest that she had a less than 2%, I think 1 in 78 chance of getting 4 out of 7 correct, which she did. Mm-hmm. So those are significant results considering the circumstances, and he just threw them out.
Yeah, I think that's worth looking further into.
Yeah, at least looking further. I'm not saying she's got X-ray eyes, but something's going on there.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was the first time I knew about these professional skeptics like Wiseman, and it was just disgusting and really antithetical to the idea of actual science. Mm. So then I completely, without knowing this was the same guy doing another skeptical inquiry, I read about this psychic dog case where Sheldrake I think he was contacted by somebody who had this dog that apparently could tell when she was coming home, even if it was at a random time or whatever. So he was studying this dog, and Wiseman contacted him and wanted to participate and did his own little study. And again, he came up with weird, arbitrary criteria that are not scientifically valid. That's
like what?
Highly questionable. One of them was the dog had to stay at the window for 2 minutes straight, which that's just not how dogs behave. Sheldrake focused more on when the dog went to the window, like how from that point, how much time did it spend, whether it left and came back or not. Mm-hmm. Another one that Wiseman did is if the dog went to the window for no apparent reason at any point, he would throw out the rest of the data for the entire day. It's just nonsense.
Well, I would think what you should do is just observe the dog throughout the day anyways and just see how long this dog goes to the window. Because if it's going to the window like all the time and then it's like, oh my God, I went to the window before its owner came home. It's like, well, goes to the window all the time,
right. Yeah, it's common sense.
Yeah.
And so that's what Sheldrake did. And found both in his data and in Robert Wiseman's data, he found the exact same pattern, which is, and again, I'm quoting this from memory, so this is all on Sheldrake's website and other places, so check it out. But I believe what he found is that even in Wiseman's case, where again Wiseman also threw in random shit, like he did this for 4 days. Sheldrake did it for 200 days. In these 4 days, one of them went to a totally different house, like the owner's sister or something, where like the couch was at a weird position and the dog had to like balance on it to look out the window, and it was sick. And once it went to the window to alert that its owner was coming home, it left less than 2 minutes in to go vomit. So that's a miss according to Wiseman. Anyway, even allowing for these absurd circumstances and arbitrary criteria, Sheldrake analyzed Wiseman's data and found the exact same pattern, and he found that the dog stayed in the window 74% of the time when its owner was coming home and 4% when it wasn't. And again, it's possible I'm off by a couple digits, but that's significant.
Sure.
They also had the owner, they had one of the test participants in the Wiseman case, they had his assistant with the owner, and the assistant determined when they were coming home, so there's no way it was a pattern that the dog just kind of knew. They took taxis and used the assistant's car, so the dog couldn't somehow hear the car 10 minutes away. So they controlled all those variables, and honestly, his data confirmed what Sheldrake claimed, and what Sheldrake then published 2 years later after doing actual research. So, I don't know if this dog is psychic. What I know is that the best attempts to discredit this study are laughable.
What is Wiseman's deal? Is he a scientist?
He's a psychop guy. He's a skeptic. He's a professional skeptic. He works at the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry.
That's just what he does?
Yeah, he has a PhD in psychology from somewhere, and he's a former magician. But he makes his living ostensibly debunking things, while in fact just participating in farce and charade. It's offensive. And it wouldn't be so offensive if he was just a charlatan, but claiming to be a skeptic and claiming to support the scientific method against charlatans while conducting this kind of absurd, obscene antics is just really, it's out there. It's like next level ridiculousness. And so I think that we ought to look into this dog and these chicks and these rats. And
yeah, it's interesting.
There's some other weird stuff too. So like there's this thing with crystals where apparently if you synthesize a crystal from a chemical in a laboratory, from that point forward, it's easier for anyone to synthesize that crystal anywhere in the world. And sometimes a crystal will change form, usually to a more stable form, maybe always to a more stable form. When that happens, before long, everywhere in the world, it's harder to resynthesize the first version. And it's the best theory that scientists have about this, or the most popular, I guess, is something called crystal seeding, which is this idea that invisible pieces of the crystal come off, float around in the air, contaminate things. I guess they spread around the world. And then those crystal seeds from the new form of the crystal then influence all the other existing crystals. And that may be true. I looked at some data, and it is hypothetical, but it seems like that could be what's happening, and it's not just that the crystals are learning what shape to take. And that's the case with a lot of this stuff, because it is a new paradigm. And I would say even if a lot of these things are eventually disproven as anything related to morphic resonance, some of them could potentially still persist, and I don't think disqualifying any one case would disqualify the others. So that's why I'm kind of frustrated at the skeptics, because I think we should be trying to actually disprove these wacky theories so that we can learn more and confirm some of them if they're actually true. But these guys just go into it. I mean, Wiseman is on the record saying that he never seriously considered the hypothesis because he knew it was false to begin with. And like that kind of shit.
So is there anyone that's actively pursuing this?
I don't know. That's what I'm looking into next. I know Sheldrake is. He's looking into various things, like I mentioned, and he's done lots of studies. He's published like nine books solo and maybe 30 with other authors that are really well reviewed. So I'm going to check out his research. But I don't know. That's kind of the thing that I'm highly still skeptical of is, okay, this stuff seems to be very obviously significant based on the information I'm seeing. So why aren't people looking into it? That's what I'm curious about. And I don't know yet.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that's the rabbit hole you've been down.
Yeah. And I don't even care if it's morphic resonance. I mean, I care in the sense that that'd be cool, but if it's not, like, I still want to know, like, there's two questions here. The big one is there more data, and can we make more data about this kind of weirdo shit, whether or not it has anything to do with morphic resonance? Second thing is it morphic resonance?
Explain morphic resonance again.
Yeah, so I think the idea started in like the 1800s or something like that. Scientifically, it was in competition with other theories of how things develop, in morphology, it's called in biology. And essentially, it's this idea that there are invisible fields like magnetism or electricity or gravity that carry information about things, like organisms, like or crystals, or anything that occurs in nature repeatedly. So like a given species, like humans, and that these fields are actually what impart the organisms or the things with certain characteristics or behaviors or whatever. And that's basically the theory.
Okay.
And that the more something happens, the more likely it is to happen. So there's also a probabilistic quality to it. So it's not that things are predetermined by a morphic field, but it's just a strong influence. And then from there, it's probabilistic, like quantum mechanics, where you can't exactly predict what's about to happen, but you have a sense based on odds.
So a theory is like this mechanism is what makes it so these rats that are unrelated to these rats that learn to go through a maze somehow are born knowing how to go through a maze.
Yeah, that they're more probable to get through. Because like one of these debunking studies for the McDougall rats found some of the rats passed through the maze successfully the first try. And
well, there's some chance to that.
There is some chance, but they accounted for that. And again, the thing is, these scientists, the second one was trying to disprove the first one, so they're not buddies. They're not conspiring. Like, this is just a standard replication exercise.
Yeah. Well, that's what science is. That's what peer review is. You want to
at its best form.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they agreed that neither of them had any idea what was happening there. Same in the case of the chicks that Sheldrake did with Stephen Rose. There were some effects that neither of them could explain and didn't predict, but they support Sheldrake more than Rose. There's some other ones too, like there's the Flynn effect with IQs. So apparently people are getting smarter, at least according to results on IQ tests. People are getting better at IQ tests over time, over generations. And there's some theories as to why, like, more kids spending more time in school get used to taking tests more, or nutrition is better. Sheldrake says it's maybe because of morphic resonance, and there's just the more people that take a given test, the more future people will be better at it from like kind of the collective unconscious practice. I don't know. Sounds a little wacky. He spent some time in India apparently during his studies, and they were just like, well, yeah, obviously this is how things work, which is interesting as well. There's definitely a cultural component here.
Yeah.
They just took it for granted that he was basically just detailing stuff that everybody knows in India, I guess. Whereas here, people just call him a charlatan and a scam artist. But it's weird. It's all weird. I don't know what to think of this.
So we're going to have to conduct some studies on Kimiko?
Yeah, probably not on Kimiko.
Too stupid?
I was going to just conduct studies on you, like you and I.
Oh, okay.
Like maybe like have each of us like think of a picture and then the other one tries to guess it. One of the things is, so like 10 years ago, I did my own little psychic research, sort of. I just try to read my friends' minds, usually while drunk, just out of curiosity mostly. I don't know what spurred me to do it, but I had really strong results. At least they appeared to be really strong results. I eventually stopped. One of the problems I had is that every time I had a miss in my psychic shit, I would get really embarrassed and self-conscious, and then I couldn't continue because I'd be distracted. So I'd try again some other time. And I think I stopped when I had one session where everything was a miss. It's interesting that that only happened once. But anyway, so I want to go back, kind of revisit that and think of it in terms of practice, because some of these studies most of these studies are more about learning over time than they are about just spontaneous abilities. And that's something I hadn't considered. So I think it would be interesting to see if you and I trying to read each other's minds many times over a period of time can develop some kind of results that are greater than chance.
What am I thinking right now?
You're thinking of boobs.
Damn it. You're psychic. I'm always thinking of boobs, though.
Yeah, to be fair, so am I. So I was kind of afraid I was reading my own mind. Sometimes butts. It's not only boobs.
Yeah, come on. There's more to a woman than her boobs.
Sorry. There's also a butt. Yeah. That's it.
Huh. Cool.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff, Kevin.
Yeah.
So we're going to do some psychic tests.
We are.
I look forward to it.
Yeah, and the other thing is that like some of the test results, there's so much shit I really wish I would have looked into more closely before, because like Sheldrake, one of the things I heard is that he had these studies confirming that people could tell that they were being stared at, and so I was like, oh, that's interesting. Then the second thing I heard about it was that it was just studies that people did on the internet and submitted their results to him based on their own personal studies they did at home, and I was like, well, that's nonsense, so I'll just ignore all of this. And I still stand by the idea that it's not nonsense, but it's not significant scientifically. But then it turns out that was just one study he did. He's done a lot of studies that were actual studies, and he's reviewed other people's studies and vice versa. So I should have looked into that earlier, and I also should have looked at numbers more. So there's a lot of the stuff that I didn't realize how strong the numbers were. Like in the Natasha Demkina case, I thought it was 4 out of 7 was significant, but I didn't realize that it was that significant. In the case of either the sense of being stared at or one of these other studies, it was something like a 56% result in favor of psychic ability, which doesn't sound too enormous, but the calculated odds were 1 in 10,000 that would be chance. So it is significant, as it turns out. But nobody's claiming there's anybody who's always psychic and is never wrong. And I think there's this idea that I think started with Sagan's quote that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Right.
And off the top of my head, I'd have to say, first of all, I don't agree with that. I think that extraordinary is relative. And if what you're claiming is outside the current paradigm, it may seem extraordinary to somebody else who has their head up the ass of the current paradigm. But evidence is evidence. I don't see why you would apply a different standard to something you think is weird than you would to any other scientific evidence. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how you interpret the word extraordinary.
Yeah, it'd be extraordinary if anybody could keep up with Wiseman's bullshit. But that's because he's going out of his way to smudge all the results in favor of his reputation.
Oh, tell us how you really feel.
Yeah, it's disgusting. And to be fair, this is all a while ago, so maybe he's changed his ways. Wiseman, if you're listening and you're less of a douche now, I respect that. I have been a douche as well at times. I'm certainly not going to condemn somebody for life. But it is a crime to go around claiming you're a skeptic and doing shit like that. Moving on. What have you been up to?
Okay, so I went down a totally different rabbit hole this morning and learned some interesting things that I'll share with you. So I'm a little embarrassed to bring this up because I feel like it's one of those questions that, I mean, especially given the climate right now, like I might get flogged for. But I have always wondered why the crows in Dumbo are considered racist. And I almost posed this question in Reddit. There's a Reddit board called I'm Afraid to Ask. But then I was like, why don't I just fucking do some research myself?
Wow, how novel.
I know, right?
Let's hope that spreads.
Figure it out. Because my interpretation of it was like, okay, so the crows in Dumbo are clearly, they're voiced by black actors, and they're supposed to be, they talk like some black people do in Ebonics
at that time. Yeah.
And they're like very jivey and like stuff like that. And I always interpreted it as like it didn't seem offensive to me. It was like,
right,
there are people like this.
Yeah.
So what's wrong with making a cartoon of it?
Sure.
And in the story, like they help Dumbo, fly. I think they give him a feather or whatever. And anyways, before I kind of researched this, I think maybe the one claim I saw was that, well, because the crows sing and dance, that's like akin to minstrel shows. And it's like, well, it's a Disney movie. Like
right. Everyone
sings and dances. So I wrote some notes. I looked this up and I went down this rabbit hole and I found this guy named Thomas Floyd. And Thomas Floyd was the first black Disney animator. And he's like in his 80s now. So he didn't work on Dumbo, but he did work on Sleeping Beauty, which I think was like maybe 5 or 6 years after Dumbo. And he's worked on a ton of Disney movies. And just last year, he actually wrote a blog entry called Black Crows and Other PC Nonsense. And I saw this in Wikipedia. And when I saw that title, I was like, I thought it was something that was written like after Dumbo came out. And I was like, were people saying PC then? And then I look at it and I was like, oh, this was just written last year. So this guy's like in his 80s. And he basically defends the crows like the same way I just did. Like he's just like, look, Disney actually hired black dancers to come in and dance so that they could like get their motions right for the animation. And they're these like cool, funky characters. And how are they any different than the birds in Jungle Book, who were supposed to be like the Beatles? Do you remember those?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Like it's just this group of birds that help the main character, and they sing and dance and all that. And so I was reading about that, and then the one thing I got to, which I was like, okay, I can see how this is problematic. One of the crows was named Jim Crow. And so I was like, oh, fuck. Okay, well, there you go. But apparently he was originally named Jim Crow. And then just a few years after Dumbo came out, not like in 2020 or anything like that, but like I think Dumbo came out in 1941, the Disney movie. And then like something like within 5 years later, they renamed the crow Dandy Crow. And they don't actually say Jim Crow in the cartoon. It was just kind of like they just named him that. And then they're like, actually, let's change that. And Thomas Floyd, the guy who wrote this blog entry, said that he was named Jim Crow as a jab towards Jim Crow laws.
Oh, I see.
But even
does he know that, or is he speculating?
Well, again, he's been working for Disney for a number of years, and he said that he talked to the animators of that, and he's worked within Disney, and so these were his claims based on like the people he talked to and whatnot. That one makes me scratch my head a bit because this was the 1940s. Like, was that a time in which you can make an ironic joke about Jim Crow laws and have it make sense to people?
Well, whether or not it made sense is kind of a separate question. I mean, a lot of subversive jokes are snuck in just purely for like as a private joke.
Yeah.
I mean, I maybe not. If that's what he says,
I don't know either. But that is the one where I'm like, okay, that makes it seem like
it's at least questionable. But it's not like he was named Jim Crow is a good thing, you know. Like,
but do you know who Jim Crow was?
No.
Okay, so this was another thing I wanted to go look up. I thought Jim Crow was just some racist guy that liked segregation and like created all these laws. Like I thought maybe he was a politician. Jim Crow was actually a character, a blackface character from a minstrel show made up by the man who invented blackface, Thomas Rice. So he based this character, this is kind of, the typical kind of minstrel show blackface stereotype of, stupid, lazy black people and that sort of thing. So it was a horrible racist stereotype. And then for some reason from there, Jim Crow became like a pejorative term that people would just use for black people. And then from there, all these racist laws came about, and they decided to name them Jim Crow laws after this like pejorative towards black people.
Wow.
Yeah. And so then I started going down this like history of minstrel shows and blackface. And did you know that the minstrel shows would occasionally have black people in them?
I think I knew that.
Yeah, but they had to wear the blackface makeup, even though they were black. And there's a man named William Henry Lane, who was one of the first blackface performers, and he invented tap dancing.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and then reading more about it and how the minstrel shows kind of they went out of fashion. They were like the biggest form of entertainment for Americans for like 50 years or something, which is crazy.
Jesus.
Yeah. And then it kind of went out of fashion, and then like vaudeville came about, and they would have blackface performers there. And then it said like around World War I that just like totally they kind of stopped doing it. But apparently a lot of black people at that time didn't want it to go away because that was the only way that they could be entertainers. Which, like, I mean, horrible thing, but you kind of see that logic there where it's like, they can't just be a normal actor.
Yeah, I mean, in that kind of system, like, I can understand feeling like you have to hold on to whatever little you have.
Right. And then I was thinking, how is that different than how we treat dwarfs and little people? how they're just pigeonholed into being like, I mean, not totally, like there is, what's his face on Game of Thrones? I can't think of his name.
Yeah.
Peter something. But like, but
Peter Dinklage.
Yeah. But for the most part, like we pigeonhole like little people into being leprechauns and being shot out of cannons.
Yeah.
And doing these kind of crazy, like performative things.
Yeah. There's some stereotyping. It's just not, it's not like that's literally enforced. It's, there's not.
No.
I guess that's the main difference is just that it's more about bias and stereotyping sort of informally, I guess. Like it's not like they're not allowed to do anything else.
Yeah, technically speaking, it's not like they can't try, but
the odds are against them.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember I was in the Philippines and they have this kind of red light district like entertainment area, and they had like dwarf boxing there, and I went there and I watched it, and I remember talking to someone afterwards about it, and he was a expat living in the Philippines, and he was telling me that when he first saw this, like it made him uncomfortable. He thought it was very exploitative, and then he talked to some of the fighters, and they were like happy to do it, and they were happy to be like making money and earning for their family and all this sort of thing. Which I suppose is all fine and good, but like it does come back to like
that may or may not be a defense of it though. Like that, you kind of have to treat it agnostically because again, there were black people doing minstrel shows who wanted to keep doing them, and that doesn't mean that they were a good institution.
That's the analogy I'm making. Yeah.
But I mean, I guess just the way you said it sounded like he had confirmed that it's okay because.
Oh no, I was just explaining what he said.
Yeah,
and I can kind of understand that too. Like, I suppose if you are in that situation and you don't want people to see you as, maybe a victim or being exploited, and you're like, hey, I'm having fun doing this, like whatever, I'm making money. You want to respect that too. But also, you want to create a world where that's not, the only thing they can do to earn money.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this reminds me of years ago, I one of the business models I experimented with involved hiring overseas workers to do small manual tasks through an Amazon project called Mechanical Turk. And so the idea is you create what's called a human intelligence task, a HIT. And it's anything from like saying what's in a picture to checking something for spelling errors, sorting something. There's a bunch of stuff that's relatively menial. Some of it's more complicated and skilled. But it's the gimmick is that you can pay just very small, like I think it's as little as like 2 cents or something like that. I can't remember, per task, up to whatever you want to pay. Some of it's worth a lot more than that. And I was never really sure if this was exploitation or not, because it's like, on the one hand, this is only possible. I guess there's two factors that enable this. One is exchange rates. So like 2 cents for me may actually be a lot more based on exchange rates in different places, regardless of whether or not somebody's dirt poor on the other end. But then also a lot of people are dirt poor on the other end. So on the one hand, I don't want to, this was the kind of the ethical quandary I was having at the time. I didn't want to exploit anybody, but I also was thinking, well, if this is an option for them to work and I can't afford to pay U.S. wages for this work, then if I don't hire them, they're just out of work and I'm not getting this work done.
Right.
So who benefits from that? But then on the other hand, if I do hire them, it's sort of like I might be extending and propagating this differential and sort of giving it an incentive to not equalize. It's all very difficult to compute. It's ambiguous.
Yeah, it's the same thing with like sweatshops or sex work, where people talk about how these things are terrible because people are forced into them economically. But then it doesn't seem like the answer is to take away their only option.
Right. Yeah. So it seems like working at a meta level, like working on the system, like regulating things or pushing for change, whether it's regulatory or social or political, to try to equalize the differences rather than just demonizing anyone who participates in it from either side, or, going on diatribes or something. Working on the system is it seems like a much better approach. Just at the very least to try to make it equitable to the people who are participating in the short term, make it safer, that kind of thing. Do what little you can to ensure some kind of safeguards. And then long term, hopefully I like to think we're going to reach a point where everybody has some level of basic sustenance and infrastructure to get by. And if so, that's not going to be because you arrested a prostitute.
Right.
Yeah.
Agreed. So, we have a fascist regime coming through Portland right now.
Yeah, this is in the news. Today is July 21, 2020, for those listening from the future, which is everybody. Yeah, so we've been in the news for the last week, I guess, a little less than a week, because apparently Trump sent in...
Federal police?
Yeah, I think from DHS and like maybe the Border Patrol, something like that. And I don't know exactly what they are. They're dressed like the military.
Right.
With ambiguous labels like police, with seemingly no department or name or ID. And they're abducting people off the street who are, I guess, protesters. It's an open question whether they're also taking people who aren't protesters, putting them in unmarked rented vehicles like minivans, and then taking them to undisclosed locations without charges, and then apparently releasing them without charges. I guess they're releasing them. That's what I heard from you. The one thing I'll say is that I am curious about the particulars of who they are, and I haven't looked into it, so maybe this is easy to find out. But what little I've seen about them, they don't look like they're super well trained. They kind of it almost looks like Trump just rounded up some of his aides and was like, here, put on camo and here's a gun and go hit people with sticks or something. But anyway, yeah, you probably know more about this than I do.
Yeah, maybe. I'm so confused by it, though.
One thing I want to add as well, the ACLU sued the federal government over this, which you could pretty much guarantee they would. But also the Oregon Attorney General sued the federal government over this.
Yeah, our leaders here aren't happy about it.
The mayor, Ted Wheeler, and Governor Kate Brown both said this is unacceptable. They have to leave. The mayor has also pointed out that things have gotten much worse since they arrived. There's more violence. Somebody set a police station on fire the day after they arrived. Like, they broke into a police station and set it on fire. And then I read a headline today in a little blurb that said that actually authoritarian regimes are known for doing this. It's actually a tactic where they send in troops to quell violence, ostensibly, knowing there's going to be a violent backlash against what is actually a sort of like having civil what is it called? What is it when the military... martial law. So essentially they get martial law and a taste of fascism, claiming that they're putting down violence. Then actual violence erupts in response. Then they feel justified, or their supporters feel justified in reinforcing the undeclared martial law, because it's also illegal for the military to operate on U.S. territory without martial law to be declared. Maybe they're not military. They look and act like military, except in minivans. So who knows?
Yeah, so basically for the past 49, 50 days, I don't know, there has been at least protests going on. There had been riots too. I haven't gone out to any of them, so I'm not speaking firsthand. I'm just videos I see, and you know, I try to get my information from a lot of sources, but I realize that I still probably don't have a complete picture. But certainly protests every night, and then something like riots, I'd say. I mean, I know the Louis Vuitton store and the Apple store got broken into and looted kind of in the early days. They like to set fire to things. They like to get dumpsters and burn them. They set the police precincts on fire a couple times, I think. So, but as far as I know, like, no one's gotten hurt amongst the protesters. So I would say it's like protests that are rowdy. I think rowdy would be fair to say.
And I mean, they are destroying property and destroying businesses. And
and I mean, I'm kind of careful with it because it's like, I understand that a lot of the protesters want to separate themselves from people that are doing that. Yeah. And I want to respect that, because I know that, you know, like, for instance, Black Lives Matter is supposedly a peaceful movement and all that. So I understand. I'm sympathize with protesters that are like, fuck, you know, I just want police reform. We're not trying to like destroy someone's shop. But it is happening. And there have been people getting hurt, but from what I can tell, it's all been from the police or these federal police. Like, recently there was a video that came out where it was like a line of protesters, and then I believe the federal police that came in kind of from a distance. And I think they threw one of those tear gas things. Like, it's like a little thing that you just kind of like throw it out there. And they threw it towards the protesters. And then this protester picked it up and tossed it away from him, but still towards the cops. It didn't look like he was trying to throw it at the cops. It was more like he was throwing it away from himself, and then it was kind of in the middle of the road. He was just like tossed it to get away. And then they shot him in the head with a rubber bullet, like right after.
Wow.
Yeah, like right in the head. And you look at these pictures, like he is fucked up. Like I
think I saw pictures of him in the hospispital.
Yeah.
With a big hole in his forehead.
Yeah, and it's very gruesome. It's really disturbing. And yeah, of course that's going to fucking make things worse. Jesus Christ. Like,
yeah, that's not good.
No. So I don't know where this is going.
Yeah, I don't know where anything is going. I to the listeners who've been listening for at least since March, I guess, is when I started speculating openly about the downfall of civilization. Mm-hmm. And that was, at the time, all that was happening was the pandemic was spreading, and people were getting unsure about what to do about it, and talking about shutting down economic institutions like businesses or schools or, at that point, I don't even think anybody was really being told to shelter in place. I think that was even before people were being told masks aren't helpful, which was nonsense and was a lie to try to preserve masks for medical workers, and has now been reversed and admitted to. Anyway, at the time, all I knew is there was a pandemic, it was spreading, and our president is Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And based on that, I thought that it was almost a 50% chance, I guess, which is based on just intuition, that within 2 months to 2 years, we would witness the end of the current era of civilization, either with civil war, nuclear war, or just some kind of regression to things like infrastructure, cultural values, institutions, and order, I guess you could say. I didn't know how to see if I was accurate, so I started looking at things like utility outages and frequency of riots. I remember back in like April or something, I heard about one riot somewhere in New York State. I don't even know if it was the city, and I was like, oh, maybe this is evidence that there's civil unrest brewing. And now it's like, you can't turn around without seeing a riot across the country. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know how extensive it's still going on, but a month or two ago, it was very extensive. And to this day, you have government property that's occupied by protesters. They've left it. You have police leaving police stations. Yeah. I mean, it's worse. It's not worse than I thought possible, but it's worse than I thought likely. Mm. And I think it suggests that we're much further down that path than I would have hoped. Doesn't mean it's the end of the world. Lots of things can change. I certainly can't predict a system as complex as this, but I'm concerned.
So when you say like the downfall of civilization, like what does that look like? Is that like total like Walking Dead, everyone like militia for themselves, or is it that maybe America goes from a first world country to a third world country?
Well, it could be lots of different things. So the thing is, it could be a downfall, or it could just be a regression, like a rollback. So, for example, we might lose things that we take for granted, like access to relatively clean water. I say relatively because 3 years ago I read an article saying that you remember the Flint, Michigan lead scandal? Mm-hmm. So I read an article.
That never got resolved, right?
I don't think so. Yeah. But, people still point that out sometimes, but not only that, but this article from NPR I saw 3 years ago said that, oh, by the way, there's 5,000 United States cities that are worse than Flint. And that was never a headline. Nobody I've ever brought that up to was aware of it. So when I say relatively clean water, that's what I mean. It's not like we have a perfect system.
Right.
But we might lose even running water. We might lose electricity or consistent electricity. We might live in a year from now, we might have rolling blackouts as the standard. We might lose consistent internet access. We have already experienced a degradation of emergency response from police and fire departments. LA was burning a month ago and didn't have enough firemen or fire people to even go to every fire. Mm-hmm. So it could be that that's as bad as it gets, or it could be that before long we just accept that some of the things we take for granted we don't have. And that I would consider a major rollback, and also has the potential to become a cascading failure. So I started studying complex systems because of this, which has led me to really interesting places. Like there's also connections between morphic resonance and complex systems. And a guy named Stafford Beer who wrote some very interesting stuff about viable systems modeling back in the day. What was I saying?
About the downfall of civilization?
Right. What led me to... Oh, cascading failures. So the thing is, like, there's two things that I think are central to critical infrastructure systems, like the ones I named, that are both central to their existence and also highly vulnerable. One is that they run largely on momentum and faith, so I guess there's three things. Momentum meaning that these things were built kind of just to compensate for population growth, new standards about things like drinking water, whatever. It kind of organically is pushing just based on ostensibly progress. So there's a lot of momentum behind it. And then faith. So things like the economic system and fiat currency is entirely faith-based.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big vulnerability as people are rightly losing that faith.
Right.
And then in addition to that, these systems are interdependent. So if we lose, like let's say something happens, maybe a terrorist attack to exploit the vulnerabilities, and we lose running water for like a whole city, right? Everybody's going to leave, or almost everybody. That means the local power plant's not being staffed, or staffed by military or something. Maintenance isn't being done there. So then the power system starts to break down. Maybe there's an internet outage. That leads to communication failures, which leads to more shutdowns of everything else, more problems. You have nuclear plants to consider that could melt down. There's an endless variety of ways that these systems failing either in a major way on a large scale or very consistently or for extended periods could cause all of them to collapse.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we see degradation and a rollback of these things that's contained, but if it starts, I do not have a lot of faith it will stop. If it stops, it's not easy to restart. You don't just jumpstart these systems.
Mm-hmm.
So if that happens, I think we're looking at least a couple generations of humans before anything meaningful is rebuilt from the current infrastructure. So that could be a problem. You could also just see values rolling back, and by that I mean there's already a lot more violence. You have people who were relatively peaceful a couple months ago calling for the execution of all police officers on social media.
Ooh.
Well, I mean, random people I don't know, but...
But you said they were peaceful before?
Relatively, yeah. I mean, people who would probably be like, cops, fucking narcs, whatever, casually aggressive or hostile to authority,
mm-hmm.
maybe, are now saying things like all cops are bastards, which has become a popular slogan.
Mm-hmm.
You have a lot more violence in general and a lot more advocacy of violence against one's purported enemies.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a problem. This could lead to increased support for the death penalty, increased militia activity. You really could see... I mean, there's nothing bad that I think is impossible based on the current situation, particularly things that have already happened. If there's anything that we did in history that was bad, that's a risk right now. So it could look like that. Or it could look like The Walking Dead. Like, all infrastructure is done.
Mm-hmm.
And you hang out with your buddies and trade your neighbors' bullets for sandwiches.
Mm.
And hope you don't get killed today. That could happen. Or nuclear war. We're all dead in a month.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Well, we're at an hour.
Cool.
Should we wrap it up?
By the way, I should also add, again, it's possible none of that will happen, and that would be great. Because I do have a lot of faith in humans. Humans are...
Wrapping up with some optimism.
Maybe
it won't happen. Okay, bye, guys.
Yeah. If nothing else, humans are adaptable and,
I agree. I think people are very resilient.
Yeah.
And ultimately good. And I think we're recognizing some big problems we have. I am totally in support of police reform. I would like to see, Breonna Taylor see justice and George Floyd and all that sort of thing. But also I think there is a bit of a moral panic going on as well. And there's lots of excesses to what is some legitimate concerns of our society today.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. I also saw today somebody posted on social media that I believe 37% of Americans missed their house payments in July this month.
How many?
37%.
Wow.
And
Shit.
We got a long way to go. The virus is spreading. It's a misconception that people think we're in the second wave, but we're actually in the first wave of the virus still.
There's a wave on top of a wave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because people started to reopen the economy to avoid. I don't know what they were claiming, but based on what I just described, most of that would come from an economic collapse more than anything else. That's the thing. It's not that I'm not worried that the virus will cause a nuclear war. I'm worried that the virus's secondary impacts will cascade into a nuclear war. So, we started reopening economies when people were like, I can't get an unemployment check because the government is overwhelmed and I can't pay my mortgage and I can't buy medicine. So I'm opening up my shop again,
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of the overall sentiment. And then immediately the virus spiked. Lots of people died. I think, what are we up to? Like 150,000 Americans already?
Something like that.
And so they're shutting down again. And but the thing is, it wasn't a second wave. It was the first wave just continuing. So
Yeah.
we got an interesting rocky road ahead.
Yeah.
So buckle up, people. All right. Thanks for listening. And send us your listener questions at standardpodcast.com.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.